go clean somebody's house who just had a baby, or bring them a meal, or watch their kids. And your life kind of becomes that. Like, you look for opportunities and you step in because we have a generous God. This is one of our family has core values and mission statement. And one of our core values is generosity. And we say, because God has been wildly generous with us, we are in turn generous with our stuff, our money, and our time. And so I think that's the invitation to everybody. It's with your stuff, it's with your money, and it's with your time. And I think that everybody gets to participate.
Welcome to the Generosity Now podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories of generosity and whole life stewardship. Our goal is to showcase individuals and organizations making a positive impact in our communities and across the world. I'm your host, Eric Mose, president of the National Christian Foundation for the Rocky Mountain region. I'm joined by my fantastic, amazing, wonderful co-host, Laurie Bossert, VP on our team. How you doing, Laurie?
I'm not all those words, but thanks for the compliments, Eric. I appreciate you.
Well, on today's episode, we have two local NCF givers, Josh and Kaitlin Saenz, joining us. Josh and Kaitlin run an organization called Compel You that provides fractional donor development work for Christian nonprofits. And Kaitlin specializes in coaching nonprofit leaders and homeschooling their two amazing boys. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
So glad that you're on the show. Would you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself, each of you, Josh and Kaitlin? Where did you grow up? What was family life growing up? Tell us when did you come to the Lord, and tell us about your family today.
Yeah, we both grew up in Orange County, California. I made my way there in third grade, and that was home until about 8 years ago when we moved out to Denver, Colorado area, and we love it out here. Today our family consists of Josh, myself, and our two boys, Josiah and Levi. They're 10 and 6, and busy boys.
Yes, our hands are full, if you can imagine. But growing up in Orange County for both of us, we were in this world in which there was a lot of affluence and a lot of faith. Orange County is a surprising area of California. It's a very highly densely. I think it's like one of the highest churches per capita in the nation. It feels like a little Bible Belt. And so growing up in that, we both had a rich faith as young kids, and saw both through like youth group and just the people around us, kind of what it meant to follow Jesus. It was pretty normal. And I think we both kind of at similar ages made our faith our own in junior high years. And we saw church as such an integral part of our lives. Like, it became a centerpiece, and still is to this day. And so we spent about 10 years in full-time ministry out in California prior to moving to Denver, where I jumped into the marketplace and did business development, marketing, and sales. And Kaitlin, actually a couple years into that, dove into full-time church ministry at our church, Park Church in Denver. And so our life feels like it's been this equal parts of like ministry and pastoring, as well as business and marketing. And so we find ourselves today running Compel You, which kind of brings those two worlds together to serve Christian nonprofits with donor development and fundraising. So we love that. And we are just, as a family, doing it together. We're all in on our business together, our travel together, our ministry together. And that's ultimately what caused us to make certain decisions, to have our own business, to homeschool, and to live the life that we do.
It's so fun. It's really unique because all three of us families represented here all have made the choice to homeschool, and all of us all have boys also. And it's just, isn't it amazing just how God weaves some of those stories together? Mine are way older and way through the process, but I think you guys all have them pretty similar ages. So how fun.
Well, Laurie, you said it was amazing. We're still laughing and think it's God's big joke on us, because we were the family that said we would never homeschool. And here we are. So never say never.
Truly. Well, and Josh and Kaitlin, we have a really unique story because we actually had a public school psychologist in the state of New York look at us and say, I wouldn't put your oldest son into kindergarten. And I went, well, what do you do then if you don't put him into kindergarten? And she literally said, if I were in your shoes, I would homeschool your kids. And so God just used a megaphone in my life to say, this is the advice that I want you to do. And so we heard, not quietly, a very loud calling. We then moved from New York State to Colorado in that year, and homeschooling did for us. It was a great thing. We did not homeschool all the way through, though.
Well, and it's I love seeing the diversity of godly families thinking through the right fit for their family and for their kids. For us, that's what we celebrate. And our decision is often different than so many of our friends. And God bless all of it, right? It's been a beautiful journey.
And I would agree with that. So we homeschooled. Our kids went to a charter school. They also went to public school, and they also went to Christian school. So we hit all of them. There is not a perfect place there except where God is calling.
That's right. Love it.
Amen. Love that.
Well, on the Generosity Now podcast, we do talk a lot about generosity and whole life stewardship. By that, we mean our labor, our influence, our finances, and expertise. Would you share a bit about your own journey as it relates to generosity and stewardship?
Yeah. So as Josh mentioned, we have been in the context of ministry for basically our entire married lives. And when we first started out, we were in youth ministry, making a youth pastor's salary. And so I think a lot of our investment in generosity was living our life faithfully, giving our life to the people around us, loving them well, pointing them back to Jesus. And I think early on, we just kind of felt like our lives can be generous. And so that's what we're going to do. We might not have the finances, but we have a lot that we can offer, thinking about generosity holistically, not just financially. And we had a life group once asked the question, is it easier for you to give your time or to give your money? And it was interesting. We both were like, oh, our time, for sure, because we have limited resources. And it's been cool to see how that was something that we were actually made aware of pretty early on in our marriage. And then later to move out to Denver, have some shifts in our life and have some change in our capacity financially. Josh moving into the business world, me going back to full-time work, opened up our ability to be more generous with our finances. And so it was funny to look back and say, wow, we definitely thought it was just time. And now we see how does it look for our entire life, our whole life, not just our time and our home and our energy, but also our finances.
Yeah, it was actually friends of ours who invited us to a journey of generosity retreat. And I remember thinking gosh, this sounds so good. And we were excited about the conversations that were happening. I think what was refreshing was the fact that people were talking about giving in a normal way, so that it wasn't this odd, secret, quiet thing. That actually, I think, was what really started working on our hearts to say, gosh, this stream of thinking is really refreshing. And then from that point, those same friends invited us on a Wycliffe Bible Translators Donors Weekend. And our hearts were just captured by a couple of things. One was we noticed that the people who were there, who were giving generously, were some of the happiest people we'd ever been in a room with. And we were saying to each other, I want to be with these people. These are great people. And then secondly, I think being called to participate into something bigger than ourselves and bigger than we could accomplish on our own in the midst of community was just, that's what sold us. And to see that not only that, but our kids, their hearts were captured by the vision. And I don't know, as parents, if your kids are excited about kingdom work, you're going to double down on whatever that is, right? Because that's impactful. That's them taking ownership. And if they can, at a young age, catch a vision of their place in the kingdom through a life of generosity, what's better than that?
So how did your kids catch that vision? Were they on the donor trip with you, or did you come back? Or so flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So when we were invited to this weekend, what actually kind of piqued our interest was the fact that our kids were invited as well, that they had parallel programming for our kids happening at the same time. And we had been involved in Jesus Film previously and loved being a part of a community that was giving to that. And we were like, man, Wycliffe partners with Jesus Film. They use the Jesus Film as a part of their work that they're doing in new languages. And so we were like, this would be a really cool time for our kids to learn about something that we've been a part of in the past. And hopefully our family as a whole could move forward in it in the future. And so as our kids every night were going to a session, or every morning having those times, we would then like kind of chat through, what are you learning? What are you excited about? And hearing them just light up and be excited about the work that God was doing through Bible translation just really hit our hearts. And we were like, okay, we can't miss this. We can't lose this opportunity to really dive into that, because not only was God doing that with our kids, but he was doing that with us. And so we really were just praying for family opportunities for us to be generous together, and to not have generosity be something that mom and dad do and maybe our kids like know about it or mention it, but that they're fully invested in.
Josh and I were catching up just a few weeks ago, and we were talking about your shared passion for teaching your kids about generosity. And I know that we have many listeners who would love to have you share some of the intentional ways that you've been teaching and working with your kids to foster generosity. You've just hit on one of them, but I think there's other ways as well. So let's dive into those.
Yeah, as we've been thinking about what this looks like for our kids and to pass on a legacy of generosity, I think that we've been struck by this overarching reality of like normalization is really the pathway to them grasping and owning it themselves. I think far too often generosity feels like this ethereal kind of like, man, how do we harness this and like get our kids to be generous? I think some of the fear or confusion around how to do it is that it's just not talked about a lot. We don't have normal conversations in our churches or in our small groups about like very like practically like, here's what we're passionate about. Here's what we're giving to. Here's how much like we've committed to. And some of those accountability conversations, which might be appropriate in certain contexts and not in others. But we found that the normalization of it has made it so that we don't want you to be generous or do generous things. We want you to think that this is just what Christians do and who Christians are. And so really, like, I guess it's an identity and normalizing that this is just who Christians were created to be, and faithful stewardship and living out of the gospel and obedience to Jesus is that we're generous. And so I think that we've talked about, there's a couple of ways that this normalization kind of happens. And the first one that we talk about is if you want your kids to practice generosity, they've got to have something to work with. And so we notice that in our family, if we want our kids to start thinking generously and thinking creatively or out of the box, or even start to listen to where God is like pricking their hearts and obey in giving there, they've got to have some money to be able to do that. Now, it doesn't have to be like a lot of money, but we've found that because we want our kids to be generous, we almost need to take a couple steps back and say, okay, can we create places and spaces within our household for our kids to earn money so that they actually have something to work with when we're talking about being generous?
Yeah, and I'd say also we've invited our kids into knowing where we are at financially, where are we giving, and actually talking to them about real numbers. It's not just, oh, we're going to give to this, and they know that there's some sort of something that has been given from our bank account to an organization that we're partnering with, but to actually say, hey, this is how much that is. And our hope is always, hey, you don't need to go talk to your friends about this number or anything like that. We don't want to make it like a big thing, but just a normal thing. Like, hey, we can talk about our finances as a normal part of our everyday lives. And that's something I hope that will help our kids steward what they've been given their whole lives, starting that early. So giving them their own opportunity to earn money, but also pulling back the curtains and allowing them to kind of see what it's like for our family.
So just digging into that a little bit of why do you think it's important for them to be earning the money versus you just giving them the money for them to give away?
I think they feel it, right? Like, as I see it as the training wheels for our kids. I love even, there are certain piggy banks out there that separate, give, spend, and save. I love that. And because I think it helps, especially for our young boys, helps them visualize it. They love counting the money, so that it's tangible to them. And what we've found, which is fascinating, is that when we lean into kind of normalization of generosity, they are passionate about certain projects or certain things that come up, and they see their generosity like portion of their piggy bank what's happened more times than not is that they say, I want to give this and my spending and savings. And so we see them just dump it all out and say, it's almost like the woman with the perfume bottle over Jesus's feet. And it's beautiful, like that is an act of worship that we get to cultivate, and maybe give some roadway so our kids can experience that.
Can you share a story when your kids led you in a generosity act without your prompting?
Yeah, for sure. When we sent our kiddos to a VBS back a while ago, they'd been invited to with a friend at a church that we weren't connected with. And they learned the story and the impact of this orphanage in Africa. And they were so excited. Both of them came home and without even really talking to us, went upstairs, got all of their money together. And my oldest said he created a little sign-up sheet, and he was like, we are going to go door to door and talk to our neighbors and invite them to give to this orphanage. It's so important.
Well, and I think the important thing about that story is that our kid is doing this awesome thing, and he's running with passion and obedience with the Lord. And we as parents who have been trying to cultivate generosity had all these but wait, no. Try to slow down. Let's research this a little bit more. Are you sure you want to go door to door? All of these socially awkward things from our point of view were the things that they were just so willing to dive into. And we almost stopped a generous moment because I think that we have all these social cues that feel like the right thing or the wrong thing. And, we felt in that moment, Kaitlin and I had a conversation where we were like, this is so awkward. Most of our neighbors aren't believers, and I guess we should still let them do this, right? We don't want to squish this passion.
Some story about Jesus telling, let the children come. And sometimes we as the parents need to let the children teach us of what we can learn, because their childlike faith is so very real and so very much the piece that God can use sometimes to help us.
You're so right. And if we would have stopped that, they wouldn't have raised $90 that day with the neighbors.
Yeah, that is so exciting to hear.
And probably, just to guess, it's been a bridge of relationship with some of those neighbors.
Absolutely. Yeah, it has. Even just to know that, oh man, that one neighbor, I never knew that they would be so generous in that moment to my kid. It was really sweet to see even what God highlighted in our neighborhood.
Yeah, for sure.
How old was your son at the time?
I think it was 2 years ago, so probably 8 and 4. And the two of them went door to door together, and we had, okay, let's rehearse. What are you going to say? How are you going to express this? And what does it look like for you to invite somebody else into what you're excited about? And I think that's what we saw happen that day. They got to express their own excitement, their own passion, and invite people in. And I think that's something Josh and I have really loved about generosity is we don't want it to be something that's just us, but doing it in community. And so seeing our kids invite our community into something they were excited about was really beautiful.
Yeah, we're actually seeing a pretty significant trend with givers across the nation, that there's this longing and desire to be generous together with others. There's multiple. There's been over the years there have been giving circles and there's things like this, but there's I think more and more of an emphasis, especially with it's not fair to say with just younger generations. I think it's been across the board, but there's this let's do things together to make an impact.
Yeah, and I think we're the generation that grew up with crowdfunding, right? So that's a normal way of thinking when it comes to raising money. Well, of course, you just ask. And advocacy, I think, is another huge value in our generation for millennials, I guess, of giving. And what better way to give together than as a family? And I think that's start in the home, because we are also seeing not just individuals or couples who want to give in community, but families. And so we've just had a blast with connecting with other families. And that's been a huge sticking point for generosity with our kids, is that they have friends who are also having the same conversations.
Yeah, the family that invited us to that Wycliffe weekend, we are funding a project together in Tanzania with Wycliffe. And so we were let's have a night where we try as Americans to cook to cook Tanzanian food and to really like immerse ourselves in the culture and give our kids a bigger vision of what it means to give to this particular project, to see the real life impact of what kind of food they eat and those different things. And that, I think, has brought to life in new ways some of their own generosity, because they are like, these are real people who eat real food. And I think it can be really easy to just think, oh, this is like this thing we're doing. You know, it's like when you're a little kid and you see your teacher at the grocery store and you're like, you eat food? It's like you're a real person. You don't live at school. You don't sleep there. I think it just like puts some like three-dimensional realities to some of their generosity.
And it is so much of the kids are the same wherever they're born. And that also brings some of that reality of just a worldview together of how God created each one of us, very much equal. And yet we just have different traditions, different things that we do from where we are born.
You talked about the impact of this couple inviting you into a jog, which was kind of like the catalyst of this. And we've talked about this before on the podcast, but if somebody's just jumping in, they don't know what a jog is. It stands for a journey of generosity. There's no running involved in going through a jog. And jogs are, it's a safe conversation around money and stewardship and not just money, but generosity amongst our whole life, right? And so that was a really natural way, I think, for you and that couple to kind of be invited into giving together. But as you've talked about now inviting other people into giving together, I wonder, how have you done that? Have you used the catalyst of a jog to do that as well? Or like all of a sudden you just invite people over for dinner one night and pass an offering plate? What's it look like?
We got the privilege to serve for many years as youth pastors in multiple ministries where we're still connected to those students today. In fact, in a couple of weeks, we're doing a wedding for one of them. And throughout their lives, as they're growing and maturing, they start asking questions like, hey, I'm going to get a really big bonus next month, and I don't know that I know how to think about like receiving that much money. Like, what should I do? And so we found that more and more people are wanting guidance. They're wanting the conversation to be had amongst other believers. And I don't know if that's just a millennial thing. I hope it's not. But we're also seeing that it's pretty common for our friends to say, hey, we want accountability around like finances. I want you to know how much I make. I want you to hold me accountable. I want you to become my board of directors when it comes to my money. So I think that we're seeing that people are hungry for relationship around giving. And so our situations is that we've kind of stumbled upon these conversations, and some of the passions align with people who come to us with that, and we're able to work together. So that's been a huge blessing.
It's so fun to see, the community being drawn together and being vulnerable with each other.
I would say also, I think as Josh talked earlier about us normalizing generosity, I think it really has become normal. I think the things that we are giving to, we've mentioned Wycliffe, but there's other projects around our city and organizations that we're partnered with that we're passionate about. And so we will be talking about them in everyday conversation. So if we have someone over for dinner, we're not passing the plate. It's like lunch, but we're probably sharing a story about something that we've seen God do or an experience we've had, or our kids are talking about it. Honestly, our kids are the best salesmen in the world. They just, are excited and they share with just an enthusiasm that is catchy, and people will ask questions, and we've seen people interested in things that we've been involved in just because of everyday conversation, whether that's us or our kids, and doing life with one another.
I remember listening to a podcast by the title of the podcast was The Art of Manliness. And it was the exact episode. And I'm not necessarily giving you a suggestion of going and starting listening to this podcast, just to be clear. But the conversation was on dinner conversations around death and dying. And they talked about how people just don't have they're not a connected family units anymore, and this and that. I'm like, definitely an important conversation, but without a redemptive lens to it, like, boy, that seems really morbid. And out of that kind of idea, I had this idea of like, wouldn't it be amazing if we had conversations, just dinner conversations with friends around generosity and giving as opposed to death and dying? And so, you guys have done that and modeled that and bringing the kids involved. I think the idea of having the kids can be such a catalyst is really quite awesome.
Yeah, they really can. Like Kaitlin jokingly said, like, they're the best sales people for the things we're passionate about and giving towards. But I also see that like when you start to normalize that, like you said, Eric, you start to hear how the kids are internalizing that, and then like you hear their output. And one of the things that we've noticed is our oldest son, who is very entrepreneurial, always dreaming of the next business to start. He plays a role in our business that he's so excited about. Now, granted, it's just data entry and expenses and things like that, but he feels that ownership. And so he's now at the point where most kids are like dreaming about what they want to be when they grow up. He's dreaming about what he wants to do with the money that he's going to make when he grows up, to where he says, I want to grow up and have my own business so that I can give to X, Y, or Z, or so that I can fund this many Bible translations, or whatever it is like that he's passionate about in that moment. But we've seen that come to fruition in his dreams and in his like future like realities that he thinks that's just the way it is. That's what's going to happen. So I think that's been a huge piece for us to celebrate. And we try to lean into that more because that's a really cool thing to hear your kid to say.
Some of the other things I'm curious if you guys have experienced in this generosity space is, one of the things that's really hard when you're homeschooling is just finding time to get away and doing things. And I know a few families that they trade the babysitting, they trade the few hours to be able to get away. And again, that's one of those things of being generous as families to be able to support one another.
Yeah, absolutely. We find ourselves in community with people who we are like, hey, I've got a doctor's appointment, or I need this. Would you take the kids for a bit? And our kids get to then go experience life with those other families in those moments. And it's like a joy for their family to have our kids for that time. And we are able to go run and do the same, go do an appointment. And then they're able to turn around at another point and drop their kids with us. And I think seeing it as an opportunity to like enjoy time with our friends' kids outside of a regular context has been really sweet. So yeah, we love just having community that we get to live life with, where, yes, I guess it is a generous thing, but it feels normal.
But that's where some people don't realize. I would say that that's just being very generous. That is living life together with generosity being normalized.
Well, and I think that goes back to like what we felt when we had a season of there wasn't a huge financial capacity, is like generosity is as an all of life thing. And so leaning into those pockets where you can go clean somebody's house who just had a baby, or bring them a meal, or watch their kids. And your life kind of becomes that. Like you look for opportunities and you step in because we have a generous God. This is one of our family has core values and mission statement. And one of our core values is generosity. And we say, because God has been wildly generous with us, we are in turn generous with our stuff, our money, and our time. And so I think that's the invitation to everybody. It's with your stuff, it's with your money, and it's with your time. And I think that everybody gets to participate.
What do you guys see as some real challenges to kids and families today as it relates to stewardship and generosity?
I think being busy, having the time. We have so many things pulling at our attention, vying for our time. You've got kids in sports and at school and all the different places and the different realms that pull you. And even when you're homeschooling, we've got commitments to go on a field trip or different pieces that are pulling for our attention. And I think it requires slowing down and paying attention to what we have, where opportunities are, and taking time to actually pray and sit with the Lord and listen and hear his prompting to move forward with things. So I would say busyness, time, attention.
Yeah, I think like the reality is like we at one point in our lives, actually, I feel like we return to this often because it's easy to get swept up into busyness. We looked at our life and said, oh my goodness, if we continue on autopilot, the way that everything is just kind of going, the way that sports or activities just vie for your attention and your commitment, I'm not sure that we like the destination of autopilot. And so we decided that we have to be pretty calculated and thoughtful about where we're giving our time. Otherwise, the family culture that we want to shape isn't always possible. You don't have that space and time. You don't have that dominion that God has given us in our homes and in our families to be able to craft and shape the next generation. So a really helpful book for us thinking through this was Jefferson Bethke's Take Back Your Family, and talks about what a post-industrial revolution culture has done to the family, the multi-generational family at that. So that was a very influential book for us to say, hey, how do we create the space and time to cultivate the values that we feel that we want to cultivate in our kids?
We really combated a lot of consumerism in fast food restaurants, and just what that style of lifestyle looks like. And we worked really hard. If our kids were involved in sports, they didn't have to get the pictures. They didn't have to get the group award at the end and things like that. But we allowed them to play the sport. So, and just being able to make your own family rules, because there's a lot that we deal with in the culture of just consumerism all the day long. So those are just some of the examples that I know we faced a lot in what we were managing.
Well, and I think that even touches on comparison. Like, how much do we compare ourselves to others? When we get caught in that, it's hard to be good stewards because we suddenly have our focus on another family or another group of people instead of, wait, what has God called us to? How do we faithfully live? And so if we want to steward what we have and have opportunities for generosity, then we have to pay attention. And I think that's like, they're hand in hand, right? To not steward means you don't really have an opportunity to be generous because you don't have what you could have. And so I think helping our kids and our family see those things as realities and a connected reality has been an important piece for us.
So important lessons that God has taught you and your family about generosity and stewardship that you would love to share with our listeners. Do you have some of those?
When I talk about our journey into the world of radical Christian generosity, I think that we did not anticipate that participating in financial generosity would act as a key to unlock the heart of the Father for us in new ways. I think that when we, out of obedience, open up our hands and are excited to be generous about the things that God has, the people that God has in front of us, and the missions that God has in front of us to support, we get a flavor and a new experience of God's heart. We see new sides of it, new angles, and experience Him in deeper ways. And so the intimacy that happens as a result of generosity and obedience, I think for us was one of the most surprising things about generosity. And it feels like that's the nugget that we carry. And that's what the banner that we're waving to say, everyone wants to experience this. You just may not know it yet. And so that's our big platform there.
Yeah, I think also leading into community, realizing that our own impact might be something, but the impact that we can have when we join hands with other families and people in community to give, the impact just grows. And it's really cool to say, hey, I don't think I can do that. I don't know that that's something that our family alone can do. But when we partner with another family or another couple or another person to do that work together, suddenly the impact grows in ways that are like shocking and astonishing.
And Paul seems to talk about that a lot with Timothy, like that there are certain ministries and giving that build up the body of Christ and are very public displays of really God's heart and blessing. And so the more that we can share that in the context of the body of Christ, I think the more that God is glorified and that our hearts are rejoicing even more.
You know, you talk about the impact that you had with going to the Wycliffe donor event with your kids. And so I wonder what you have done or plan to do as it relates to involving your kids with mission trips. Are you maybe, is there a trip eventually to Tanzania where this Bible will be launched? What have you done or are you thinking about doing or considering?
Yeah, we are all praying because now there's 4 families involved in some language group translation in Tanzania. And so we're praying for a scripture dedication celebration trip for us all in 2025. So Lord willing, we'd get to share kind of the joy together on the ground in Tanzania.
That's so cool.
That's something fun to look forward to.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think in the meantime, we've just tried to keep that kind of as a forefront, anchor praying for those people and that country and the translation work over different parts of our day. So oftentimes it's like during breakfast, we'll sit and have those times. And so trying to keep that at the forefront of our mind and dreaming about the future. So like having both something to look forward to and then something today to hold on to continue that as something that is forefront and not easily slipping away.
Well, we wonder if you have any helpful resources. We talked about this at the beginning that you'd like to share, books, podcasts, websites, as it relates to raising up kids and things like that.
Yeah, I think that this is a space that's been largely unattended to. And I think that people are starting to pay attention. I know, Eric, you're constantly sharing things that you've heard and resources that you're catching hold of with us. And I think that that's what we hope, is that there's more conversations and like practical resources for families. I would just say from a broad brush strokes, not directly related to generosity, but the book I mentioned, Take Back Your Family by Jefferson Bethke, largely helpful in like crafting a family culture, which actually matters when you talk about the conversation of generosity being a cultural reality rather than just a side project. But we want all the resources. So you let us know, what are some that you've come across recently that have been impactful?
Yeah, so we were just earlier today involved in an episode with the author Matt Bell of the book titled Trusted, Preparing Your Kids for a Lifetime of God-Honoring Money Management. And so it's a book that I would commend to you, as we've commended to others, depending on when this episode actually drops, is one. I think the Brad Famorsma and team with I Like Giving have done some very good things. Actually, we shared some curriculum. So there's some homeschool curriculum they've created with about how to foster generosity within a family. And so I think going to look at some of their videos is another really good resource as well.
Those are great videos. Yes, you shared that with me, and we loved those. Those were impressive.
Well, guys, we are so grateful for the time that you guys have invested in us, your generosity to making time to have this conversation. I just wonder if you guys have any other thoughts on generosity and stewardship that you want to share.
So just thinking through, before we actually made a big leap towards generosity, we'd always been faithful in tithing and giving back to the church financially. But once we felt like God put a call on our heart to be generous and gave us a number that honestly scared me, I was really timid and really nervous about like, can we do that? Does that make sense? Does this mess up? I don't know. Like what are the dominoes that fall when you say yes to God's calling on something so big? And I was pretty nervous. And as we just like prayed through it, we just felt like, man, like God, you're calling us to this. And so we're going to be faithful. And I would say like, I would never look back. Like, it's just so cool to see the ways that God has changed our heart, our family, but also provided. And I feel like that's something people always say, oh, God's going to provide. But I think experiencing that for me personally just really changed the way that I want to give. It changed the way that I steward what we have. And it's helped me just to really believe that everything we have is God's. And so, I don't know. I just think like it might be scary to dive into generosity, to give above and beyond, whatever, 10% a typical tithe. And just to say like on the other side of that, man, I just couldn't imagine going back.
And think about this, for those who are hesitant about that, like there is a generational reality where we get to influence our kids and raise them in a way to where that may not be a hurdle down the road, where they have this crossroads of like, should I do it? Should I not? Like, would that our kids be the type that when a generous moment comes, they're all in, right? Like that would just be, the beautiful bow on the package at the end, is that our faithfulness today actually matters for generations to come in this lane of generosity.
On the Generosity Now podcast, we do seek to inspire, equip, and connect our listeners for generous kingdom impact and whole life stewardship. For more information on this, please check us out at ncfgiving.com/Rocky Mountains and generositynow.org. Please go ahead and subscribe to our podcast, leave us a 5-star review, and share this episode with a friend of yours that has young kiddos at home that can grow and benefit from hearing this episode specifically. And Laurie's got a doxology for us.
Out of Deuteronomy 6 and 7, these commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up.
Well, yes and amen. Yes and amen. Thank you so much, Laurie, for sharing that verse with us. Josh and Kaitlin, thank you for the time. We're so grateful for you being here.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. It's so fun.